Beneath Jerusalem's crumbling hills and centuries of buried secrets, something ancient finally broke its long silence. For generations, people hunted for Solomon's lost tomb. Now something has been uncovered, but is it truly his resting place or just a trick of time and stone? Before history buries the truth once more, King Solomon stands as a fascinating figure because the Bible makes so many extraordinary claims about him. Let's dig into what was discovered and why the world may not have been prepared for it. The legend of Solomon's missing tomb. They called it nothing but a myth until a forgotten tunnel changed absolutely everything. For centuries, people searched beneath Jerusalem's hills, chasing rumors of a king buried alongside riches beyond imagination. A king whose name still echoes through the ages, Solomon. The man was celebrated not only for his wisdom, but for building a kingdom so powerful and so prosperous that it left the entire ancient world in awe. Solomon came into power as a young teenager, stepping into the role left behind by his father, King David. But he didn't simply keep the kingdom breathing, he completely transformed it. Trade exploded across borders, Gold flooded in from distant lands, and at the very heart of it all, he erected the first temple, a 7-year masterwork gleaming with cedar wood from Lebanon, gold panels that shimmered in the sunlight, and stones so perfectly shaped they barely required mortar. The stories of his extraordinary judgments are equally remarkable. Take the famous case where 2 women each claimed the same infant. Solomon proposed splitting the child in 2, not from cruelty, but to reveal who would willingly surrender the baby. And one woman did. That was how he identified the true mother. That single moment made him a symbol of justice and sharp intellect across the ancient world. Even the Queen of Sheba traveled to witness him herself, arriving with caravans loaded down with spices, gold, and riddles. She departed speechless. Not only had Solomon answered every challenge she brought, but he surpassed every rumor she had ever heard about him. How can you see through sand? You mean across sand? No, through sand, your majesty. His empire stretched well beyond Jerusalem's walls. Ships set sail to Ophir and Tarshish. Those mysterious lands some believe lay in Africa or India, returning with ivory, apes, and extraordinary riches. In southern Israel's Timnah Valley, copper mines under his control churned out wealth that archaeologists are still uncovering to this day. Yet one mystery has always lingered. Where exactly is Solomon's tomb? There is no stone marker, no chamber, and nothing that confirms where he was finally laid to rest. Some were convinced it had to lie beneath the Temple Mount. Others speculated about secret caves or hidden chambers sealed away for thousands of years. Over time, the search lost momentum beneath too many dead ends and too many legends, and most experts quietly gave up. No, it is just the appetizer of the 4th season. We are going to continue. But then something changed. A discovery, whether accidental or deliberate depending on who you ask, would crack this ancient riddle wide open, and what was uncovered wasn't simply a tomb. It was a message buried in silence for 3,000 years, now clawing its way back into the light. What was inside, we are only just getting started, the relentless pursuit of the tomb. We were led down excavated tunnels and shown one of the greatest archaeological wonders in the world. A single crack in the ground, barely noticeable after a rainstorm, changed absolutely everything. For centuries, locating King Solomon's tomb felt like chasing shadows across sand. From medieval knights digging beneath the Temple Mount to 19th century explorers tearing through the hills of Judea, every search concluded the same way. Empty-handed, some departed convinced the tomb had never existed at all, while others blamed bad luck, or worse, badly drawn maps. By the time the 21st century arrived, most experts had abandoned the search entirely. But recently, something shifted. Dr. Emily Carter, an archaeologist far better known for dusty scrolls than camera flashes, was deep inside Jerusalem's archives when she noticed something unusual. Tax records dating back to Solomon's era, hidden within ancient Hebrew text, was a clue. Payments directed to a location kept entirely off the official books, a place near the city of David, a site so carefully concealed that even history itself had forgotten it existed. The city of David is the kind of place where if you pick up a shovel and dig, whatever you pull from the ground is going to match the pages of the Bible. Armed with radar technology capable of seeing straight through solid rock, her team began scanning a rugged hillside slope in Silwan. The terrain pushed back hard, jagged limestone, shifting soil, and constant setbacks, fueled by rising political tensions, sparking frightening incidents like the one that unfolded earlier that same month. Still, they pressed forward day after day until nature itself intervened. A sudden downpour loosened the hillside, exposing a shallow depression in the ground. Something about that hollow was immediately off. It didn't fit. Beneath it, the radar pulsed like a living heartbeat, detecting tunnels. Not natural formations, but deliberately constructed and reaching deep below. The passage had been cut into solid rock at roughly 13 meters underground. The crew was stunned, and the excitement crackled through the group like electricity. The team rushed to secure the site. Every shovel stroke carried risk. They also found that the tunnel had been built with false entrances, and a single wrong move could send centuries of secrets crumbling down with the stone. Dr. Carter spent sleepless nights interpreting fragments of ancient writing, working through a trail deliberately designed to mislead thieves and tomb raiders. Symbols pointing toward a concealed entrance. Nothing showy about it, just clever, quietly tucked away in open view. The greater portion of this structure remains buried and still awaits excavation. What we have uncovered amounts to less than a quarter of the whole. Honestly, probably far less than that. But that wasn't truly the turning point. The real shift came when the team stumbled onto a story, a half-forgotten tale handed down among shepherds, about a hillside that shimmered beneath moonlight, a wall that glittered like a sky full of stars. Dr. Carter stood on the edge of that very hill. The ground was wet beneath her feet, their boots sinking with each step forward. Yet something about the stillness, the way the rock seemed frozen in place, as if guarding something, it felt genuine. They were getting close. They could sense it. And just beyond that sealed passage, behind a doorway untouched for thousands of years, something lay in wait. What they uncovered next didn't simply rewrite the historical record. It stopped every one of them cold as they broke through the ancient seal. That week, archaeologists revealed what appeared to be the long-lost tomb of an ancient king. What if all that separated the modern world from a 3,000-year-old secret was a single stone slab never intended to be opened? The seal did not give way quietly. It let out a sound like something ancient had finally breathed out after thousands of years of silence, following weeks of cutting through jagged limestone, dust, and uncertainty. Dr. Emily Carter's crew had traced a paper trail from crumbling tax records to a forgotten hillside in Silwan. Now they stood facing a stone slab so deeply buried in time that the earth itself seemed to have deliberately concealed it. But this was no ordinary rock. It was a barrier, a warning, and a riddle rolled into one. Getting past it required far more than simply pushing or pulling. The slab was part of a broader system, one built specifically to protect whatever waited on the other side. Hidden within the narrow tunnel walls were false routes and dead ends, some engineered to bring the entire structure down if tampered with. Ancient stonework, yes, but designed with extraordinary sophistication. A trap laid by people who fully anticipated grave robbers and managed to outwit them all. As the ground groaned and shifted beneath their feet, Dr. Carter examined ancient Hebrew markings near the entrance. A sequence of 7 lines, 7 symbols, and a carved design connected to the First Temple's 7-year construction period. From the restoration of the Temple and Jerusalem to the prophecy of a coming messianic king, this was no decoration. It was a deliberate clue. Her team went to work with laser instruments and 3-dimensional scanners, charting every groove and chamber as carefully as someone disarming an explosive device. The tension in the air was thick and suffocating. A single misstep could bury the entire team. Literally. For 3 consecutive days, they adjusted levers, aligned gears, and held their breath each time stone ground against stone. The deeper they ventured, the more silent the tunnel grew, as though the mountain itself had begun to listen. Then it happened. A sharp crack, a deep rumble, and dust poured from the ceiling above. The slab began to shift, not quickly, not smoothly, but just enough to open a dark, narrow gap into something beyond explanation. They stepped back, staring into that black void. No sound emerged, no movement of air, just cold stillness and darkness. Teams working to protect the caves from looting had captured the moment of discovery on film. Dr. Carter lifted her hand, signaling everyone to stay silent. No one spoke. No one moved. That moment cracked everything open. For the first time in millennia, a story long buried was beginning to breathe again. But what exactly lurked beneath the surface? Let's just say the tomb wasn't finished revealing itself. The next move would shake even the most hard-nosed skeptics to their core. Drop a like if you're just as pulled in as we are, because this thing only gets stranger from here. A glimpse at Solomon's riches. The second that flashlight beam caught gold, the whole world seemed to pause. No words, no sound, just the stunned silence of people realizing the myth they'd been chasing had been real all along. They were standing inside it, far below the city of David, in a sealed chamber that hadn't been disturbed in thousands of years. Dr. Carter's team pressed in side by side, flashlights shaking in their grips. What stretched before them wasn't rumor or legend. It was treasure, heaped up, stacked high, tucked into every corner as if it had simply been waiting to be found. Lining the walls were golden vessels, their surfaces etched with ancient Hebrew script, gleaming as though someone had buffed them clean just yesterday. Hebrew inscriptions had been turned up during standard conservation work at an old synagogue in northern Israel. The air in the room carried the scent of thyme, spices, and resins, something both earthy and sweet that seemed to hang there permanently. At the opposite end of the chamber, a 7-branched menorah rose up from the floor, massive and flawless. Its proportions, its base, its every curve, all of it matched what the first temple was said to have contained. But this was no museum reproduction. This was the real thing, possibly original, and it was only the start. Every direction they turned, the chamber had something to say. Strips of silk, faded but unmistakable, hinted at trade routes that once stretched as far as India. Delicate ivory carvings spoke of agreements made with kingdoms across Africa. Small jewelry boxes, some still fastened shut, held earrings and chains set with emeralds, rubies, and lapis. One archaeologist, barely holding it together, leaned over and whispered, "This makes the British Museum look like a thrift shop." Even more jaw-dropping, a sealed clay jar cracked open and released a puff of fragrance, saffron, frankincense, and something citrusy, spices so vibrant it felt as though time itself had simply hit pause. The whole scene seemed almost too deliberate, as if someone had arranged it all to be discovered one day. But not everything made sense. A handful of pieces bore symbols nobody could identify. The style of certain items looked more recent, or at least out of place. The archaeologists involved say they're eager to press on, hoping for even more finds ahead. Could these objects have belonged to Rehoboam, Solomon's son, or perhaps another ruler who tucked his wealth alongside a legend? The thrill was genuine, but so was the uncertainty. And in a room like that, uncertainty has a way of ringing off the walls. Still, every single piece, each jewel, each carved image, carried its own story, and taken all together, they formed a portrait that felt like it had stepped straight from the pages of Scripture. Yet as breathtaking as it all was, the chamber felt less like a destination and more like a preview of something far greater. So the team proceeded with enormous care. Laser scanners swept across every surface. Not a single artifact was moved without being fully documented first, because one wrong step, one careless hand, could wipe away what the desert had kept hidden for centuries. A significant discovery had come to light. Fragments of a biblical scroll along with other ancient relics had turned up inside desert caves in Israel. The menorah alone had the potential to reshape everything we thought we understood about the temple. But nobody was celebrating yet because they had come searching for a tomb, and this place didn't look like one. Even so, everyone felt it. This chamber wasn't the final chapter, it was merely the first layer, and whatever lay deeper had been buried there for a reason. The unexplained markings and the knowledge they concealed. The gold was breathtaking, no question, but the writing etched across the walls, that's what truly brought them to a standstill. Still humming from what the treasure chamber had shown them, Dr. Carter's team turned their attention toward something far more puzzling. Hidden alongside everything else were biblical treasures, the likes of which Israel hadn't laid eyes on in more than half a century. Torchlights swept across a cluster of markings carved directly into the stone. symbols that weren't simply decorative, they seemed to pulse with purpose. Right at the center sat a star-shaped seal, precise and deliberate, nearly identical to the one described in ancient writings as the Mark of Solomon. Not merely a royal emblem, but according to legend, a powerful instrument used to command spirits. And it didn't end there. The engravings ran in precise geometric patterns, some straightforward, others layered with spirals and angles so exact they resembled architectural blueprints. One archaeologist murmured quietly, "This isn't just math. This is something far beyond standard temple measurements." Certain symbols laid out ratios, angles, and architectural details so intricate that the 10th century BCE started feeling suspiciously ahead of its time. Even Dr. Carter cracked a smile and said, "We came expecting a tomb and walked out with Solomon's calculus notebook." Then their attention shifted to the tablets stacked in the corner, almost as though they had been left there deliberately, waiting for someone to come along and read them. A collection of clay tablets carrying dense Hebrew script, some worn and faded, others perfectly engraved, bore nothing but the name of God written in Hebrew. With more on that, here's David Campanale. One tablet described temple dimensions almost word for word straight out of the book of 1 Kings. But another stood apart entirely, the language twisting in unusual directions. Its structure broke conventional rules. It read less like a historical record and more like a riddle. This particular tablet pointed to something peculiar, a key connected to hidden knowledge. Dr. Carter stopped cold. Could it be a reference to the mystical key of Solomon, a text bound to ancient rituals and codes long written off as legend? Nobody said it aloud, but the thought was already circling the room. What if these weren't simply instructions for constructing something? What if they were deliberately concealing something instead? Then somebody spotted it, a chest tucked into a dark recess carved into the wall, nearly overlooked, roughly the size of a carry-on bag. It appeared heavy, fastened with metal latches and decorated with the same star symbol seen on the wall. There were no hinges visible and no obvious locking mechanism. You could sense the atmosphere shift as the entire team pressed in close. Nobody reached out to touch it. Opening it felt too dangerous, far too risky, but the pull was undeniable. Was this where Solomon had stored his true secrets? Could it lead somewhere toward the Ark of the Covenant? Or would it simply swing open a door to even more unanswered questions? And just as the team thought things couldn't grow any stranger, someone picked out a detail buried within the carvings, one that matched nothing they had encountered up to that point. A symbol that felt out of place and out of time altogether. That's the moment the whole story pivoted sharply in a new direction. The academic firestorm. We're going to press on, and very soon we're going to come across something truly significant and remarkable just ahead. It wasn't the treasure or the menorah that split the world wide open. It was a single sentence, etched into stone, that sounded like Solomon speaking directly from beyond the grave. "Only because the blood of David runs through your veins, just as it runs through mine. I spare your life, but I cast you out of Israel for eternity." Dr. Carter's team had just wrapped up their work deciphering the unusual star-shaped carvings when they noticed it, tucked along the tomb's eastern wall, barely catching the torchlight. 5 lines written in ancient Hebrew, worn smooth by centuries, yet still sharp enough to send a chill through the room. It reads, "May wisdom steady my hand as stars steady sailors." That line landed hard, not only because it echoed the poetic voice of Proverbs, but because it felt deeply personal, as though someone, perhaps Solomon himself, had left behind a message intended to endure through ages of silence. The tent, back at base camp, erupted with activity as laptops chimed, phones rang out, and photographs of the inscription flew across continents. By the time sunrise broke over Jerusalem, the academic world was already blazing. Certain experts declared it the smoking gun they had long been searching for. The writing style, the language, the location, every detail aligned with Solomon's reign, right down to the 970 to 931 BCE, dating recovered from the chamber walls. That's one section of the double gates on the Temple Mount, the part that still extends underground beneath the Temple Mount. They pointed back to earlier discoveries, the menorah, the trade goods, the architectural annotations, and declared this was the missing link, proof of the man behind the myth. but not everybody was convinced. Critics moved in swiftly, dismantling the evidence argument by argument. They challenged the authenticity of the carvings outright. Some went so far as to claim the wording felt overly polished, almost too perfectly composed. Others flagged faint symbols near the inscription that appeared Persian in origin, raising the possibility that someone from centuries later had carved the text specifically to imitate Solomon's voice. Inside conference rooms and across online forums, it descended into chaos. Professors talked over one another on live streams. Journal editors stalled publications to wrestle with competing theories, and headlines screamed everything from Solomon discovered to holy hoax. And right at the center of it all stood Dr. Carter stood composed amid the surrounding disorder. Nobody set out searching for a king, yet the clues kept accumulating. If that isn't reason enough to investigate, then what is? Every single line of that inscription carried more weight now, far beyond mere words. It suggested a king wrestling with authority, gazing toward the heavens for direction, and quite possibly leaving behind the only first-person record of his reign. And my ears are nearly catching priests and muttering elders. I will prove to you I am king in Israel. Yet one problem remained. If the carving was genuine, then who or what was sealed away inside that final chamber just up ahead? Because Solomon's name had already stirred controversy, but what the team was about to uncover would leave everyone speechless. Share this with someone who enjoys a good mystery, because this story is only beginning to unfold, a discovery that rattles convictions. One name etched into stone ignited a storm that spread well beyond the world of archaeology. Just a few days after deciphering that haunting prayer, possibly written by Solomon himself, Dr. Carter's team stumbled onto something even more explosive. Toward the rear of the chamber, beneath a thin coating of dust, was a fresh cluster of inscriptions, ancient Hebrew, chiseled with deliberate care, describing a royal visit in 950 BCE from the Queen of Sheba. Your Royal Majesty, allow me to introduce my sovereign, Her Royal Majesty, the Queen of Sheba. The instant they translated her name, it felt as though time had frozen, because this wasn't simply another biblical reference. This was the very same story recorded in the book of 1 Kings and in the Quran. Solomon and Sheba, two figures separated by centuries yet revered across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, were now possibly brought together in stone. Rabbis hunched over Torah scrolls, imams comparing verses from the 27th chapter of Surah, and priests quietly conferring over worn Bibles. The carving didn't merely echo scripture. It appeared to breathe life into it, like a bridge constructed from stone, reaching across thousands of years. But for every believer rejoicing, a scholar was narrowing their eyes in suspicion. Some called the timing far too convenient. Others pointed to stylistic inconsistencies in the carved symbols, details that didn't quite align with the 10th century BCE. Could it have been added at a later point? A tribute inscribed by a devoted scribe, or worse, a deliberate forgery designed to stoke religious tensions? The conflict escalated quickly. Online discussions devolved into heated arguments. Certain Islamic scholars contended that the wealth of the tomb contradicted how the Quran portrayed Solomon. Wise, absolutely, but never excessive. If you go and visit the location for yourself, you'll see that these chambers he discovered were heavily damaged. Meanwhile, political figures in Jerusalem debated over who had rightful claim to the site. Religious boundaries, already stretched thin, began vibrating with renewed intensity. But beneath all the noise, something deeper was stirring. Because the carvings implied far more than a royal visit, they pointed toward an alliance built on trade, diplomacy, and shared wisdom between two ancient civilizations. And if that truly occurred, it could mean those sacred stories aren't purely spiritual in nature, but are also grounded in history. Still, the question lingered. Were these inscriptions revealing the truth, or simply reflecting what people hoped to find? And just as the debate reached its most heated point, the team discovered something tucked within a sealed alcove, hidden behind the Sheba wall. Not another inscription, not a crown, something that had the power to change everything once more. And it was never meant to be discovered. A king's seal brought to light. It wasn't another carving. It wasn't a scroll. It was something smaller, yet heavier in significance than anything else found before. Folded into the corner of the chamber, behind a cracked stone table untouched for centuries, lay a gold ring, thick, solid, and unmistakably royal. At first glance, it appeared to be just another buried ornament, but then the light caught its surface. Carved into the face of the ring was a six-pointed star. Now, this was no modern symbol borrowed from a contemporary flag. It was rough, hand-carved, and ancient, yet it bore enough resemblance to the Star of David to bring the entire room to a standstill. Laboratory tests would later confirm the finding. The metallurgy aligned precisely with the 10th century BCE, but even before those results came back, the whispers had already begun. Was this Solomon's ring? His royal seal, the very one that may have stamped trade agreements with Phoenicia, correspondence sent to Sheba, and decrees that shaped the kingdom of Israel? Then it hit them. This wasn't simply a ring, it was a signature left behind. Still, caution began to creep in. Certain experts pointed out that comparable rings had surfaced from the 8th century BCE, mostly connected to King Hezekiah and the Star of David. That symbol wasn't widely recognized until much further along in Jewish tradition. So was this a coincidence, a family keepsake, or had Solomon embraced the symbol long before any historical record captured it? Imagine the team hunched over microscopes, tracing the seal's edges with laser-level precision. Every groove, every scratch was argued over, as though it held the answer to everything. These ancient structures rise up like ghostly markers from a buried past. Their real history, still half hidden, handling the object was no small matter either. Micro tools, oxygen-regulated cases, days of careful cleaning without ever making direct contact. One careless breath and it could fall apart. But the risk was absolutely worth it, because if this ring genuinely belonged to Solomon, it could be the very first tangible connection between his hand and the world he once governed. And just as the team started to believe they'd uncovered the crown jewel of the entire site, they heard something. A faint echo, almost like stone shifting or something quietly stirring, because directly behind where the seal had rested was another wall. And beyond that wall, well, nobody was prepared for what was waiting. Echoes of Solomon's music, right behind the wall that concealed the golden seal. The team discovered something like a song. Archaeology continues to unravel the enigma of how and why these extraordinary wonders were ever built. At first look, it appeared to be more text carved into stone. But as the dust settled and their flashlight beams swept across the surface, a distinct pattern emerged, repeating marks, rhythmic spacing, and small symbols that resembled sounds far more than words. Dr. Carter leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. She murmured to her team that these weren't prayers at all. They were notes. The team went completely still. There, on that cold limestone wall, buried for 3,000 years, was something that looked unmistakably like a musical score, and not just any composition. This was layered and intricate, carved using symbols tied to ancient instruments, harps, lyres, and quite possibly flutes. One particular marking clearly echoed the 10-stringed harp associated with King David, and according to the book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 25, Solomon had inherited more than a throne. He had inherited an entire symphony. Outside the chamber, music historians were already locked in debate over what they were looking at. Some argued the style aligned with early Hebrew traditions. Others felt it looked suspiciously Babylonian. The Babylonians eventually chose to conquer Jerusalem. And yes, he revolted against Nebuchadnezzar, not the wisest move. Others felt it was simply too refined and too precise to belong to Solomon's era. Back at the site, one of the interns picked out the markings on a replica harp. It was rough and uncertain, but something about the sequence sent chills through the whole team. These weren't merely notes, they were directions for worship. Still, the excitement carried doubt alongside it. Were these carvings genuinely authentic, of which many sections have been uncovered beyond the city walls? Could they have been placed there by a later ruler hoping to honor or replicate Solomon's court? Some markings carried a faint Persian quality. Others refused to be cleanly dated, but regardless of where they originated, the effect on everyone was identical. For just a moment, the tomb no longer felt like a place of death. It felt like something breathing. The inscriptions were carefully scanned with lasers and cataloged with microscopic attention. One careless touch, one breath too near, and 3,000 years of music might simply disappear. But even that risk couldn't keep the team from following the sound. And as the final note faded away, the chamber revealed one more surprise. Tucked just beneath the carved score, sealed firmly into the wall, it was neither music nor a map, and it pointed towards something even further below. Perhaps the truth, the tomb itself. If only these stones had a voice, what a triumphant chorus they would raise, heralding the arrival of the king. Is this truly where Solomon was laid to rest? After all the golden rings, ancient melodies, and temple inscriptions, here comes the part nobody anticipated. They still haven't found Solomon's body, not even remotely. Despite all the noise on social media and those breathless headlines declaring Solomon's tomb discovered, the reality is far murkier. Yes, the chamber was genuine. The artifacts were undeniable, and archaeologists say they haven't uncovered even half of what might still be buried there. Everything pointed toward the 10th century BCE, Solomon's era, but it was not a burial site, at least not yet. Within that tent, pitched just outside the city of David, Dr. Carter and her colleagues were surrounded by maps, stone tablets, and every scanning device archaeology had to offer. What they had uncovered might have been a royal archive, perhaps even a private place of worship. But there was no sarcophagus, no skeletal remains, no death mask of a king, just the legacy of a ruler and a trail that keeps slipping away. Still, the evidence was difficult to dismiss. The menorahs, the harp engravings, the Queen of Sheba inscriptions, and the golden seal all pointed unmistakably to Solomon. But without a body, it's like discovering the crown with no king to wear it. That didn't stop the speculation from flowing, though. Certain experts were convinced the tomb lay nearby, just buried deeper. Others cautioned that the whole narrative might be an elaborate work of symbolism, Solomon's life honored in memory, but never physically preserved. And when we dig into this earth, I believe we're connecting with something divine and with one another in a profound way. AI scans of the location, still heavily restricted because of Jerusalem's religious sensitivity, revealed something extraordinary. Hollow cavities, geometric patterns beneath the bedrock, and possibly additional chambers, or possibly nothing at all. But excavation couldn't continue, not yet. The area surrounding the Temple Mount is among the most disputed ground on Earth. Working there demands far more than a simple permit. It requires full-scale diplomacy, and so the team is left waiting. As things stand today, the final resting place of Solomon remains concealed. Yet the ground has not fallen completely silent. Not yet. So, what's your take? Could this be just the outer edge of something far greater? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and go ahead and hit subscribe, because if that next chamber ever opens, it has the power to rewrite history. And somewhere deep in that darkness, he just might still be there, waiting to be found. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.